All right, welcome everyone. As Christian already mentioned, you're on mute and we can't see your video, but the session will be recorded and then we'll send it out afterward. And obviously it's going to be very fun and we'll be learning a lot. So as you've already been doing, please do use the chat if you're going to just be chatting. However, if you ever have a question for our panelists, please put that in the Q&A, and Natalia will actually be moderating our Q&A sessions at the end of each speaker's allotted time. So first, we're just going to go over some announcements. We'll do introductions of our leadership team, and then we'll get into our presentations. And before wrapping up, we're going to try to stay really punctual today, ending at 11:30. So just to start, I'm Nicole Huggett. I'm one of the leaders for the Tucson Tableau user group. I do a lot of healthcare focused data outcomes and performance improvement. Christian, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Christian Felix. I'm also one of the co-leaders for the local user group. It's been an awesome experience. I've loved getting to know a lot of the local data viz community here in Tucson and beyond. It's something that I really enjoyed doing. So thank you guys all for hopping on this call, and hopefully it'll be beneficial and fun for everybody.
And Natalia.
Sure. My name is Natalia Garay. I joined the Tucson Talk leadership team last month, and it's been a lot of fun connecting with the community and learning from experts. So hopefully we have a good session today. Welcome, everyone.
And we are still open to having more people join our leadership team. Of course, it's really great to have a lot of diversity in terms of experience and people. You know, it's a great way to network and to learn a lot more about Tableau. So if you are interested in joining our leadership team, please reach out to us. We have email, LinkedIn, Twitter, and of course the community page as well. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into some of our announcements and just talking about what's going on in the Tableau community right now. There was a new Tableau release, 2020.3. Just some highlights about that. It's got a lot of exciting new features. You can now actually write to external databases using prep. You can connect tables with more conditions and calculations, and has some predictive modeling. So a lot of great things there, and hoping that maybe at one of our next meetings, we'll be able to go into detail with some of those highlights a little bit more. Tableau Live Asia Pacific is happening next week, August 26th. It'll be starting at 8 p.m. Arizona time. And of course, if that's not a convenient time for you, which it might not be being so late in the evening, that actually will be recorded and will be available. And it sounds like it's going to have a lot of interesting presentations. It's split into 3 tracks. So one is what's new in Tableau. So you'd be able to get some of those details about those new features. Another track is how to be a data leader. And then finally, why data skills. So we'll be sure to share that link once that's up as well. Don't forget about the Tableau Talent Finder if you've been impacted by COVID-19, or if you're just looking to switch it up, or you're looking for someone to join your team with Tableau. The Talent Finder is a great way to find jobs. There's that link there if you need it. And then finally, just some of the other resources. Tableau has a ton of different resources. The DataFam Community Jam has been having monthly meetings, and those are all recorded and published as well. So you can go back and look at the archive meetings back all the way to the beginning of the pandemic. They really ramped things up to make sure that people are still engaged in Tableau and have things to do while we're all stuck at home.
One thing, Nicole, if I could just touch on that, that's not linked on here that I would encourage everybody to check out. So the Viz Competition, the submittals were due a couple weeks ago, and Tableau has a gallery of all 371 Viz entries. And we can add the link to this slide deck before we post it, but there's just some awesome visualizations in there. So if you have a chance, go explore those. I believe all of them, most of them, if not all of them, you can download and dive into, kind of reverse engineer to learn some functionality. So really an awesome resource for those of you trying to learn and improve in Tableau, which is all of us. So thanks.
Oh yeah, no, thank you. And aside from that, don't forget to do Makeover Mondays, Workout Wednesdays, a lot of those hands-on activities, of course, to give a little bit more experience and learn a lot of new things. All right, so I'm going to pause this for just a second. We're going to go into a Kahoot. If you're new to our group or new to Tableau user groups, this is going to be just a really quick, fun poll and quiz. And this week we're doing a quiz in honor of our first speaker, Erin, who is from Kansas City. So this week we're Kansas City themed. All right. Oh, let me go here. And so here we go. Get the right screen for you. So in order to start with Kahoot, just go to kahoot.it and then put in the pin 1872. We'll give everyone just a minute to get that in there.
And if, I'll just add this before we get started, if there is a desire, we are giving away, it's kind of hard to see because I have the invisible cloak on this mug, but Tableau mugs for the winner of this Kahoot. There we go. So it says eat, sleep, Tableau, repeat. All right. So one more reason to go hard after this Kahoot championship here.
Thank you. I totally forgot to mention that.
Not in Tucson. I like that username entry. Somewhere else.
Where is somewhere else?
I don't know. It could be anywhere. We may find out.
So mysterious.
Yes.
All right, so it looks like we're at 20 players. We'll go ahead and get started. You can join late. It's totally fine. So we're going to start off with just some really easy poll questions to kind of get you warmed up and ready to go. So I want to know, are you wearing pajamas? Because we can't see you. And that's kind of one of the beautiful things about working from home.
I'm really interested to see the results here. Yeah.
Wow, the majority of people are, dressed to impress. So I gotta say that because obviously we're in Arizona and it's like 110 degrees, I tend to wear shorts.
Yeah.
Just, I can't be bothered.
Flannel pajamas don't sound good in 110 degrees. How strange.
And I should mention, once we get to the trivia questions, speed is really important in answering. You get extra points if you answer quickly and correctly. Of course, these poll questions are a little more laid back. Did you submit Iron Viz before the deadline earlier this month? The theme was health and wellness. And again, if you didn't, definitely be sure to jump on and check out that gallery. No. All right. So for the few people that did, I'd be interested if you could put in the chat what data set you used and maybe even share a link to your Viz. That'd be really great. I'd love to check that out.
Good idea.
All right. So now we're jumping into the trivia questions. Get ready. Oh, no, sorry. One more poll. Have you visited Kansas City? Because if you have, you might have a leg up on this quiz. But if you haven't, you're going to be making a few educated guesses.
A lot of educated guesses, or not so educated guesses.
Only 3 have. All right. So this should be interesting. Okay, now we're actually jumping into the quiz. Kansas City has more what per capita than any other city in the US? Barbecue restaurants, of course, famous Kansas City barbecue. And we're gonna have one more barbecue question on here. So it's kind of perfect that we're right before lunch because you're probably gonna be hungry at that. All right, we have Josh leading so far. Congratulations, Josh. Before going into politics, Harry Truman owned a haberdashery in Kansas City. So what is a haberdashery?
Oh my goodness. Where in the world did this come from?
A shop that sells men's clothing. I'm really impressed
Never
that
been.
quite a few people know this because I definitely had to look that up. When I saw that piece of trivia, I was just like, that's a fun question. All right, Jennifer, jumping in the lead.
Strong.
In 2020, the Kansas City Chiefs won the Super Bowl, which was their first championship win in how many years?
I watched it. I can't remember the number though. They're not social distancing in that picture either, by the way. That would not be allowed right now.
Don't you miss those days? It was 50 years, so that was a really big deal, a big win for them. So, not in
Tucson. Yes.
You're still allowed to win. It's okay.
Yeah, we'll mail you.
Where did the Royals get their name from? I hope you all know how hard it can be to come up with wrong answers for these quizzes. So the right answer here is a livestock show. It's called the American Royal. It's been running since I think the 1890s.
But the distribution of those responses, Nicole, says that you do a really good job of coming up with wrong answers. So well done.
Maybe I should go into teaching. All right, so Not in Tucson staying in the lead. Did we find out where Not in Tucson actually is from?
Well, if he or she wins, we'll find out if they want some Tableau swag. So.
All right. Which was not an early consideration for the name of the city? This one was the most fun to make up the wrong answer for.
Do they do that? I don't think possums trot, do they?
I've seen them walk. I'm pretty sure they trot.
Okay.
So Roosterville was not considered as a name for Kansas City, but Possum Trot and Rabbitville were both actually early considerations. But eventually they chose, it was City of Kansas first and then later changed to Kansas City.
Awesome. That's
I kind of wish
awesome.
it'd been Possum Trot, but. All right, and who do we have? Still Not in Tucson, okay.
Wow.
The Kansas City metro area is split between two states by what road?
Oh, I got to go with State Line Road. It's probably wrong, but seems to make sense.
It is State Line Road. Yes.
Cool.
Got some movement.
Not in Tucson.
Second place, but yes, picking up there.
They're not moving.
All right, and then what makes Kansas City barbecue unique?
Erin knows this, I'm sure. I do not.
I didn't know this one either. And even though I don't eat meat, I still do really enjoy barbecue sauce.
Because you could probably put the barbecue sauce on like barbecued zucchini vegetables. Yeah.
So Kansas City barbecue is tomato and molasses-based sauces, which, so I learned about barbecue yesterday. Texas uses dry rub. I think even they do sometimes this, like put it in a big pit, which is where that open pit cooking answer came from, but tomato and molasses-based sauces. And the Carolinas are more vinegar-based.
Wow, interesting.
All right, and then are you ready for our 2 great presentations?
Bring it on.
I'm totally pumped. All right, so who is our winner? 3rd place, Josh.
Well done, Josh.
Congratulations. 2nd, Lynn. Good
Lynn.
job.
10 out of 11.
Is it
That's
not in
incredible.
Tucson? Not
That's
in
incredible. Oh
So
my goodness.
congratulations. Not in Tucson, whoever you are, if you would like to receive a gift, please privately chat Christian or me or the panelists with your address, or if you don't feel comfortable with that, reach out to us on LinkedIn through a private message and we'll get your swag to you.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm gonna stop my share now and I'm going to introduce Erin Waldron. So Erin, who lives in Kansas City, owns Data Dozen, which is a Tableau training and consulting company, and she focuses a lot on storytelling and aesthetics. So I saw her present at TC19 last year, and she did a really wonderful presentation on dashboard design best practices. And that's something that I am really passionate about personally. And so as soon as I saw her presentation, I knew she was someone that I really wanted to have present for us here at our TUG. So I'm going to pass it over to her. Thank you, Erin, and welcome.
Sounds good. Well, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you all for having me. I will go ahead and share my screen and we will come on over here. And Nicole, will you give me a sanity check that you can in fact see my screen?
Yes, you're good to go.
Perfect. Okay, well, let's dive in. Thank you guys so much for the introduction, and I loved the Kansas City trivia. There were actually 2 there that I didn't know, so I'm taking notes to stump my family come around here soon. So I'm a big Tableau geek. My name's Erin. Like Nicole said, I have a little consulting firm here in Kansas City. As you might guess, I do a lot of Tableau related things. And today I thought we would talk about something that, or someone rather, who doesn't get quite enough attention in our Tableau world, and that is our audience. So I thought we would talk today about designing Tableau dashboards that your audience loves to use, because I bet we've all been there where we've made a dashboard that doesn't actually get leveraged the way we hoped it would. So spoiler alert, this is actually really, really simple. Your audience loves intuitive dashboards that answer their questions. So fundamentally, it needs to be easy to use and it needs to be relevant to their work and their questions. And if you're sitting there at home thinking, gosh, that seems super obvious and easy and very simple, you're totally right. And just like all simple and obvious goals that hinge on effective communication, this one breaks down constantly. So in the data world, I like to, a lot of my work is building, but also a lot of my work tends to be more, I like to think of myself as a data therapist helping, IT and BI talk to each other, but it's also when we think about communication in the data space, we're thinking about the analyst and the audience and what that relationship is. So if this sounds familiar, don't worry, we could all use a little data therapy in here. And when the communication breaks down between our audience and us as the analysts, we find out very quickly that our audience does not love cryptic dashboards that just answer our questions. So they find them frustrating and irrelevant. And it is really easy to make these. So we can make beautiful dashboards that still our audience does not find enjoyable to use and that they might not actually answer the questions they're after anyways. So here's a simple formula I like to use when I'm starting to work on dashboards that helps kind of put the audience in center focus. Step 1, learn what the goals are. The fastest way to design a Tableau dashboard that your audience loves to use is ask them what kind of dashboard they would like to use. So starting off by asking our audience, how will you use this dashboard? Then we go build it. This is the thing we talk about all the time. And then once we've built it, we have to take a step back and explain what we've done. We have to kind of show our work. We have to explain to our audience how to use this tool that we've created and explain to them how we've encoded all of that data that they now have to decode as they're reading our visualizations. And then once we've got a full draft built out, time to get a critique going and ask our audience, how do we make this better? And trying to do that before we are super far along in the drafting. So I like to think of step 4 as happening in a pretty early draft stage, which means then they give us feedback. We go back and we build some more wonderful things. We explain what we've done, and then we ask them again, hey, how can we do this better? So you'll notice this is a lot of listening. We listen, we build, we explain, we listen. It's all about good communication. Now, today, got like 30 minutes with you guys. Not going to talk about building. This is the step we love. It's the step we're really good at. And it's the step that a lot of the fun Tableau user group community stuff and great Tableau conference presentations come from. And it's really wonderful. But if as analysts, we're fundamentally committed to this idea that we're disseminating knowledge, then that's a two-way street. There has to be someone on the other end of that. And so what we're going to try to do is focus a little bit more on the communication side of things and how to kind of put our audience first and foremost. So what I'll offer is 2 quick exercises that I love to do on both of our listening steps, isolating goals and critiques. Then I'll collect some of my favorite footholds and share those with you. And I like to think of footholds in a dashboard as something we do that helps give our audience traction. So when you think about like rock climbing or something like that, this is a place where you can kind of stand on and move the process forward. Footholds could be anything. They could be your title, your legends, or something that we don't use as often, which I'll show you kind of some fun, more underutilized tricks we can use in Tableau to explain what we've done as we've built our dashboards with our audience. So let's start with the first one, our goals. How about a little data Viz Mad Lib? Think the latest dashboard that you've been working on? Blank audience will use this dashboard about blank to blank, something about their purpose. They will interact with this dashboard on a blank, some kind of platform, for blank, a duration, on a blank for some sort of frequency basis. And we know these steps. These are our who, what, when, where, why. We talk about these when we're real little, learning how to read books. But these are things that we actually often set aside with our audience all the time, because often what we're given is just the what. Boss comes to us and says, hey, can I get a dashboard about blank? And they give us the content. Well, if we don't know what the other components are, the other moving pieces that our audience is actually going to use with this, it falls through pretty quickly. So consider, for example, you work in a school district and your boss comes to you and says, hey, we need a dashboard in Tableau about class enrollment. Consider, even if the underlying tables are identical, how different the dashboard you would build would be for these 2 scenarios. So the school board will use this dashboard about class enrollment to allocate funds. They will interact with this dashboard on a paper report for 3 hours on a semi-annual basis, compared to the dashboard you would build if the cafeteria staff will use this dashboard about class enrollment to prepare each day's lunch. They will interact with this dashboard on a web portal for 5 minutes on a daily basis. And what I would say here is I love this little exercise, our little data viz Mad Lib, because it forces us as we start to try to understand the goals of our audience to remember that if we only know the what, the onus, the responsibility is on us as analysts to go figure out the who, why, where, and when. And once we have that information up front, we are set up for much better success on building something that our audience is actually excited to use later on. Okay, so that's a quick exercise you can use with the goals. I think that one's pretty fun. Let's talk about critique. So once we have a draft, imagine you have your beautiful first draft. We know that the best time to get feedback on our dashboards is before we actually feel ready for this. And I would like to point out that I think as a whole, we Tableau analysts tend to be a little bit of, I don't know, maybe slightly perfectionistic. And I would say that's a good thing because we tend to be therefore very accurate, very consistent. We're great data cleaners. All of that's wonderful. But that perfectionism can sometimes get us to wait a little bit too long to get feedback from our audience. And then by that time, we've sunk so much time into it. What we really just want to hear is, do you like it? I hope it's perfect. So here's a fun little exercise if you're trying to get a critique going that you might consider with your next dashboard. And I promise you, this is actually where literary theory and dashboard design meet. So I am today a fully fledged Tableau geek and have been well indoctrinated into the data world. But my formal education is actually in poetry. So bear with me here. I promise there's an overlap. In literary theory, in case you haven't been in a lit class lately, there's a triangle we talk about all the time. It has the writer, the work they create, and the reader. And all literary theory basically comes down to people arguing about which of these three things is most important. Does it matter where the writer grew up? Does it matter where the reader is, reading in the 21st century versus the, 18th century? Or is it the work itself objectively should be able to stand and be critiqued on its own? Well, we have the exact same framework happening in dashboard creation. We have an analyst, we create a dashboard, and it is consumed by the audience. And while we talk to our audience and we work on our dashboard, the moment that we as analysts so rarely witness is this interaction where the audience, for maybe the first time, is actually interacting with the dashboard. This is the exact same thing that the writer does not have access to. Writers do not have access to the moment that the reader is sitting down with their work. So the writing world and all of its educational infrastructure went ahead and made something called a workshop. And this is where we go ahead and see that moment. So I would say the fastest way to learn what's working and what's not with a dashboard is to go ahead and workshop it. And here's what we mean by that. In a writing workshop, the idea is that the author gets to basically be a fly on the wall as they're looking at a bunch of readers dealing with the work, dealing with the text, and kind of picking it apart, seeing what's working and what's not. It is a very simple formula for a meeting, and it is also something that we see this pattern emerging in like architecture pinups and other disciplines as well. So here's how it works. Next time you need information, get brave. You have to get brave for this first. So get brave and then gather colleagues and some of your audience members into a room and have someone facilitate a meeting like this. Here's the dashboard. Talk about what we like. What do we find engaging, productive, memorable? What do we want more of? What is working well? What would we be sad if it were taken away from this dashboard? What don't we like? What do we find on the dashboard that is distracting or confusing? It feels out of place. It doesn't move us towards the goal that we actually have. And here's the kicker. The author, or in this case, the analyst, does not speak. They sit on the sidelines of the meeting. They listen diligently, they collect ideas, they take notes, and they're especially taking notes of the things where there's actually a disagreement. I bet you've designed a dashboard before where there's a camp that loves it and a camp that can't stand it. Being able to observe that conversation between those two camps and seeing is one group getting hung up where another group really thinks something is working, getting to be a fly on the wall during that moment that is usually something that we don't have access to as an analyst. We're not sitting next to our audience as they consume our dashboards for the first time. Well, create it. Go ahead and workshop your dashboard. So those are two exercises I love to kind of introduce with the listening steps. How do we make sure that we're accurately capturing the goals of our audience and then really listening to them as they say, hey, this is working, this isn't, what can we do about it? So let's talk about footholds briefly. Footholds, I think, are one of the most important pieces of dashboards that we don't talk about at all. Here's why. Every chart we build, every chart we've ever put on a dashboard visually encodes the data that we have, and then our audience has to turn around and decode our charts. And this is kind of like a treasure map or something, right? There is nothing about the actual data that hasn't been usually, unless you're just presenting tables, encoded. And there's usually a lot of decisions that have gone into making that code. But this is not a code that is meant to be hard to crack. This is supposed to be like a pre-cracked code. We want you to find the treasure. We want this to be easy to understand. The problem can be that when we are so close to the dashboard that we just spent, oh gosh, I don't know, 40 hours creating, that it becomes a little hard to imagine that any passerby wouldn't immediately understand what's happening on the dashboard. We get pretty attached, it gets hard to see. So when we think about footholds and trying to introduce those into our dashboard, the primary goal is to share with the audience what we already know about the dashboard as its builders, as the analysts. Essentially, this is glorified documentation. This is built-in documentation in the dashboard. And we all know, working in tech, why documentation matters. It's not just that it's someone else on your team needs to know what you did, it's that you in 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years are gonna need to understand what you did as well. And so one of the things that can be so wonderful about trying to build in the footholds to explain what is happening in the dashboard is it doesn't just make it more intuitive for your audience experiencing it for the first time, it actually provides the documentation that you might be relying on later. So I tend to think footholds in Tableau come in 3 categories. We've got slow and steady, just in time, and wind at your back footholds. And I think IKEA furniture offers a really wonderful analogy here. So stick with me. You got a piece of IKEA furniture, you bring it home. You've seen it beautifully put together on the first floor, you go to the bottom, you have to go attempt to find where the box is, you get the box out and you go past the meatballs, and then you're home with your IKEA furniture and it's in a big box. And you open it up. There are going to be those who read the instructions, who lay out each piece, cluster them by their letter, make sure they have all the items, read the instruction booklets fully. And these are the folks, these are the audience members that will actually take the time to read things that we have prepared for them. But there are also the folks that will just grab the Allen wrench and they're off to the races. And I sometimes am this person that we didn't read the instructions. We just went ahead and jumped on in and are starting to build our coffee table. And then there are the individuals who, the footholds that we are using that we don't realize we're using until there's wind at your back, meaning that we don't know, we wouldn't have noticed these unless suddenly they were taken away from us. A great example is like the little sketch of the picture of the furniture put together all done. If we didn't have that, we are referencing it constantly. We would notice if it were gone, but we actually don't take the time usually to appreciate it in that moment. So I thought I would gather up just a couple of my favorite examples of these footholds, show them to you in Tableau, and I've got the full workbook where you can download it as well. So, you know, I thought it would be kind of fun to see some of these in action. So we'll look at titles as questions, captions with how to read this chart, annotations in a Tableau tutorial. For just-in-time footholds, providing just one example, tooltips as sentences or instructions, and a little icon trick I love. And then we'll talk about wind at your back. So when to use templates or style guides, how to set ranges and containers to adjust effectively for people's different screen sizes, and then an exercise for hiding the unhelpful. So enough theory. Let me go ahead and switch on over and go ahead and look at the chat and see. Good, okay, this is working. So let's take a look at these. So we're thinking of footholds. We're thinking of ways to make our, make sure I'm keeping on track with the time. Make sure we have opportunities to make our dashboards, which we know so well, we love so much, make them easy to understand for a new audience member coming along. So the first one, for our slow and steady folks, the people that will actually read the instructions, one of the quickest tricks I love is turning, every chart should answer a question. Just turn the title into that question. So here, for example, this is scatterplot, one institution per dot. And what we're looking at is, do students submit more ACT scores or SAT scores? So by asking that question in the title, right away, we are pulled in as audience members into the chart. Slow and steady folks will also take the time to read little captions like this. So I've opened up the caption in here. And in addition to having the question, given kind of a short answer, the answer, it depends on the region. So we know we're looking at a different distribution from one region to the rest. I love to add a little short sentence of how to read this chart, because this, even though technical writing, let's be real, as someone who studied poetry, technical writing, not a fan. But the exercise that it actually takes to describe what is happening on your chart is really important, not only for an analyst, but to help build the confidence of the end user. So if you are listening to me right now and thinking, I still don't know what the scatter plot means, let's see if this helps. How to read this chart. Each dot in this scatter plot represents one institution. It's like, okay, I'm hovering over, I'm seeing an institution. The institution's dot is plotted on what percentage of the first-time students submitted an ACT score. Got that going across our x-axis, and what percentage submitted an SAT score, which is plotted on the right. So if we look at, for example, the University of Arizona, here you guys are, and it's half and half. About half the, 54% of the first-time students are submitting ACT scores, about 50% are submitting SAT scores. The other thing I love to do here is go ahead and say, here's an example. We're building the confidence of our audience members. If they say, okay, I think I'm understanding that, then we give them an example to help bolster that confidence even more. Almost all of the schools located in New England are clustered in the top left quadrant, meaning that a much higher percentage of those newly enrolled students submitted SAT scores as opposed to ACT scores. Conversely, when we look at the schools in the plains, right over here, the schools are now clustered in the bottom right quadrant, indicating that the ACT is the more prominent test, which would explain perfectly why growing up in Kansas, I have a vivid memory of taking the ACT. It was the Saturday morning before prom from 8 to noon. Why they thought we would be engaged that day, I have no clue. But I have no memory of taking the SAT, even though I know I did, because it just wasn't as important where I was from. Here's a third one. Annotations can be such a fun thing. You just right-click on a mark, you say annotate the mark, and you get this little text box. Annotations can be a great way to give a foothold into the visualization, because when we're unsure as audience members what to do, we go ahead and just start reading. That's what we know how to do. So if you're sitting there thinking, well, I can't annotate my dashboards because they're interactive and they'll change, one of the things that you can do is just go ahead and duplicate it, create one version that's annotated, and then the clean version right next to it that someone gets to explore. But then they're exploring with the confidence, knowing how these things work. Another thing I love, last tip for the slow and steady folks, is that if you're new to Tableau, which is hard for us to imagine as members of a Tableau user community who build things in Tableau all the time, but if you're brand new to it, you might not know how it works, just its fundamental functionalities, which means it can be really helpful to have a little dashboard that is a safe sandbox for new folks, new audience members to test out its functionality. And this is a great example where you can kind of guide people, okay, click on a state to change the bar chart. And I was like, okay, click on Kansas, see this, okay, click on a color to highlight a region, or click on the filter to change just to look at bachelor's degrees. And these kind of opportunities to just play around where you can reassure the audience, don't worry, you're not gonna break it. That can really help too. All right, so those for our slow and steady people. Now we got to talk about our Allen Ridge people, the people that are going to dive in. One thing I love to do is give those folks just one example right at the top. It is here waiting for them if and when they're ready. So they tend to be the people that won't read the instructions until they get stuck, but once they're stuck, they might read the instructions. We want to have it there for them. So for example, we've got a little, we're looking at selectivity and yield with college admissions, which is, very interesting data to get to look at in context of the scandal that's happened in the last couple of years. But one of the things that's really fun then is you're able to give people just enough to get started. The Allen Wrench people, here's our second tip, will mostly just discover the tooltips. So the Allen Wrench people tend to be the ones who dive on in and they start hovering over things and they will discover the tooltips accidentally, which is great because then you've got their attention. They might read it. And at that point, we're able to go ahead and use sentences. So when I'm sitting here talking to you, explaining how a dashboard works, I do use full sentences, usually. I don't usually use something, colon, answer. So take the time in your tooltips to actually turn them into full sentences, just like if you were sitting down next to your audience and sharing how it goes. Another thing we can use our tooltips for is some instructions about how the dashboard will react to them interacting with it. By that I mean, if you look at this tooltip that we have right now, and we have click at the bottom in yellow, all caps, click to see the test scores for just this state. So if I click on Maine, I just see Maine. If I click on just If I hover over just one dot, it says click to see the test scores for just this institution, and we can do that, things will adjust. Or click to see the region label. So what I'm doing is I'm being very consistent with my tooltips on the instructions, letting people know where can they click, how should they expect things to react. We talk all the time about, building relationships. You make a promise, you keep a promise. You make a promise, you keep a promise. Think of that as an analyst when you're building your dashboards. How can you make a promise to your audience and then follow through? And letting them know in very consistent ways, hey, this is how the functionality is going to work when you click or when you're hovering, is a great way to keep that promise. The last thing I love about the just-in-time people is that you can have something like this where you can say, start here, hover over the yellow diamond. You've got all the information you might need. And when we put a little diamond like this or a little icon they can hover over, they can get all that information that they would have gotten from the caption, let's say for the slow and steady folks, but just when they're ready for it. So it's waiting for them, it's in the wings. When you're ready for it, we've got the information for you. But as soon as you're not ready for it, we'll hover away. And of course, we've got our highlights working on the dashboard so that when you're hovering over the icon that's describing a chart, just that chart is highlighted. And then last but not least, we have the wind at your back. These are things people don't notice until you take them away and then they go, I really enjoyed that. I didn't realize how much I was using that. So 2 examples, making templates like this for your dashboards that remind you to use certain font or certain spacing can be great. If you haven't gotten in touch before with the lovely public affairs people at your organization, the fastest way to make friends with them is to go get in touch and say, hey, do you have fonts or colors or hex codes that you would really like to use? That kind of stuff actually takes the cognitive load on our audience down a notch because they recognize the branding. When we change something, whether it was intentional or not, the implication is that if it varies from the pattern we've seen, it must be important. And that as audience members is what we're assuming. I bet you can think back to my slides, pink, white, black, and if something were suddenly blue, you would think, oh, well, that must mean something. But it might just be that I forgot to change the style on the PowerPoint slide. So thinking through those ways with templates and style guides to alleviate that cognitive load, always a good thing. It opens up space for folks to deconstruct and decode those visualizations we've made at the beginning. And then the last 2 things I'll mention with wind at your back is when you are creating a dashboard, there's it appearing correctly on the screen of the audience member really does make a big difference. If it's too big or it's too small or it doesn't look quite right, and you as the analyst are thinking, oh, it looks great on my screen, why don't you see it like that? One of the things I think we don't use quite enough is on our sides of our dashboards using the ranges. So when I'm working with a client, one of my favorite things to do, set up my big desktop screen and my laptop and pull the dashboard back and forth with a range so that I am watching the dashboard collapse and shrink and expand based on where I'm showing it, putting some hard edges so it's not way too small or way too big, but giving it some breathing room so it really will fit perfectly on the screen of your audience. They will not notice, they will appreciate it. As soon as you would take it away, they would be sad. And then here's the final tip. With wind at your back, anything you can erase, do it. So when we build charts by hand and we're in 3rd grade learning how to make a box and whisker plot or whatever, we're building out, when we draw by hand, a bunch of extra scaffolding to help us really understand what we're doing and make it accurate. And then we take our eraser when we're all done and we erase those lines. But when we use software like Tableau will introduce a bunch of extra scaffolding that works well when you need it. Take the time to get rid of it and reintroduce just the pieces you want. So my example there would be like if we just went, for example, to this bar chart, and we would go ahead and open up our formatting on this chart. One of my recommendations would be to go to your shading, go to your borders, go to your lines, go to your axes, erase all of it, and then just reintroduce the pieces that you realize, I was using that to understand what we have. So with that, I will go ahead and come back over here. Thank you guys so much for letting me share some audience ideas with you. Everything that you are seeing here, I've got available on my website. So if you just go to datadozen.com, Tableau dashboard design, your audience loves, We've got all the slides here. You can download a PDF. And then if you are interested in deconstructing the workbook, which is one of my favorite ways to learn, it is right here as well. So with that, I will go ahead and look. I don't see any Q&As. So I'll go ahead and hand it back over to Nicole.
Thank you, Erin. That was really wonderful. I do want to just make sure people have just one more minute to put in a Q&A. Anything for Erin, or if you don't get it in here now, Erin, you're sticking around for the rest of the meeting, just in case?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, cool. So if you don't get it in now, I think we'll go ahead and transition over to Shaelyn. I'll let Christian jump in and introduce her.
Cool. Yeah. Erin, thank you so much. That was awesome. Really appreciate you presenting to our TUG and sharing a lot of that knowledge. I think that was helpful. I know that was helpful for me, and I think it was helpful for a lot of people. So thank you very much. So I get to introduce Shaelyn. I first met her, I think, at the very first Tucson TUG meeting we had back at the Woods Memorial Library. And I also got to chat with her a little bit when Steve Wexler came to town for his workshop. And we talked subsequently about possibly getting her to present to one of our TUGs. Tried to make it happen last month, didn't work. So here we are in August, and excited for her presentation. I believe she's been in market research for 13 years. She's a partner at Footholds. She's worked with Fortune 50 companies to do market segmentation studies, survey data, and help them get up to speed with the analytics. She is an INFJ, I believe, on the Myers-Briggs. In addition to being a data Viz expert at Hootology, she also travels globally, and I believe does international yoga retreats. Did I read that right, Shaelyn?
No, that's correct.
All right, that's very cool. So I will wrap up my introduction of her and let her fill in any blanks, but very pleased to welcome Shaelyn Delgado. Go ahead, Shaelyn.
Oh, perfect. Thanks so much, Christian. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen here. All right. Maybe if maybe Christian, if you could just give me a thumbs up that you can see this PowerPoint here. Okay, perfect. So once again, I'm Shaelyn, a partner and analyst at Hootology. And what I'll mainly be presenting is a use case for Tableau, specifically around survey data and how we use it in one of our how we use Tableau to visualize survey data in one of our products. And I thought this was an interesting topic because when I stumbled into Tableau about 5 years ago, I found it really hard to find resources around getting survey data into Tableau. And I would listen to all sorts of, presentations and was constantly searching. And it wasn't until I found Steve Wexler that I really got some great information and best practices around it. So knowing that that was 5 years ago, I'm sure that in some ways that may have evolved and there may be more information now. And if you've encountered Steve Wexler, I have to totally give him credibility for all of which I'm going to show you today because it was stuff he really taught me. So we'll get right into it. I want to give you a little bit of background on Hootology just for some context here. So Hootology is a primary market research company. We do a lot of custom market research, so I'd say that is the bulk of our business. Quantitative and qualitative, so a lot of both understanding the whys of consumer decision making, but also collecting projectable data that customers use to better understand their market. So a big part of our work is really going out to a brand's target market and helping understand, what messages resonate with them, what new concepts resonate with them. And we do that a whole wide range of approaches. Our shtick, I would say, is that we're modernizing the market research industry. Instead of, say, using, we would never use phone or paper and pencil surveys anymore, but we kind of take it a step further. In many cases, we've used, say, biometrics or eye tracking, and in some cases, such as what I'll show you today, online surveys. So a big part of our business, custom market research, but we also have some off-the-shelf products, and I'm just putting it up here because what we're going to do today is the SDII, or the Supplier Diversity Impact Indicator. So some other just simple examples of our work is with a virtual reality company to help understand the differences in engagement and emotional response to watching sports games, comparing watching in virtual reality or on television or actually being in arena. We've also worked with a leading healthcare insurer to help understand how they could more authentically communicate to the Ethiopian community. And then another example here is working with a Fortune 50 tech company to help them test a variety of immersive media concepts that relate to sports. So I'm going to dive right into the supplier diversity impact indicator, which will be our use case here today. And Hootology is a diverse-owned business, and we got certified when we first began doing business about 4 years ago by WeBank and the NGLCC. And a big part of that certification was us starting to go to conferences and meeting these supplier diversity professionals. So I really didn't know anything about this when I first started at Hootology, but there is a whole industry, and within many large companies, a whole department dedicated to supplier diversity. And so what that means is these team members are charged with the responsibility of going out and making sure that their company's supply chain is filled with lots of diverse-owned businesses. So especially with what we're experiencing today, or just becoming more aware of, a really important department. But what we found is that these supplier diversity professionals, while they were working their butts off, weren't actually able to prove their business case for how their department was actually benefiting a brand. So let's use Coca-Cola for example. Great supplier diversity program, but couldn't necessarily show the impact of their supplier diversity program on their brand's bottom line. I'm going to jump around here. They were currently demonstrating their efforts via awards, showing how much they were spending with diverse-owned businesses, and then some other things called economic impact studies, which I won't go into today. But what you really want to be able to do is that consumers actually care. So being able to show that, say, your brand Coca-Cola is working with a minority-owned business, change your consumers' perception of your brand. Does that make them think that your brand is a more diverse-owned business, and they are more likely to support you, which we had a hypothesis was the case. So we sought out to create this online survey. It was a web-based survey that could be taken on desktop or mobile to survey about 3,000 people in the US general population, census balance. And what we really wanted to understand is, what is the impact of your supplier diversity initiative? And this was a huge project. It wasn't just for one brand, but many, many brands that had supplier diversity programs. And we really wanted to help them elevate the conversation. So they were no longer fighting for budget for their department. We wanted them to feel like they had the C-suite on their team, so to speak. So we designed this quantitative survey, and I would say not necessarily the struggle, but where Tableau kind of comes in here, is we really wanted this to be equally as useful for all different brands. And so obviously all brands are going to have different target markets and different ways they're going to want to look at the data, which isn't necessarily going to be best supported by a, let's say, PowerPoint report that's pretty consistent between brands. So what I'm going to do here is now kind of get to the point with SPS here. So what we ended up delivering for this client, this is now a big project of ours, we're on our third year, but we ended up delivering for the clients of our supplier diversity impact indicator was a PowerPoint executive summary, but most importantly, a Tableau a kind of group of 8 Tableau dashboards. And the idea with the Tableau dashboards was that they could kind of pick and choose what target markets they wanted to focus on, the ways they wanted to look at their data, how strict they wanted to be in their criteria, and they just had more freedom at their fingertips. So I'm going to kind of shift gears a little bit after all the background and just talk about using Tableau for survey data. So the interesting thing about using Tableau for survey data when I first started is that so much of what I would consider the challenge exists in getting the data into Tableau. So I'm step out of this full screen for a moment here. So if you've ever worked in, let's say SPSS, and even if SPSS isn't something you're familiar, it's a statistical software program, that's completely fine. I think this presentation could really be generalized to anyone that, let's say your company maybe does a SurveyMonkey survey and gets their data back in Excel, that works as well. But if you've ever worked with survey data, it's typically very wide. And what we want for Tableau is going to be more long and narrow. So there's a little bit of a challenge in getting the data, what Steve Wex calls just so that it easily or plays nicely in Tableau, so to speak. So I'm going to pull up an SPSS file for you for a minute. If you're not familiar with SPSS, don't worry. If you are, then this will resonate a little bit. So in SPSS, we have a data view and a variable view. Our data view, each row is a respondent, and then each column is a question. And then our variable view really just acts as, I think of it almost like a legend for what all's within our survey. So for instance, in this case, each row is a question, and it talks about what options there were within that question. It labels the type of measure and so on. So typically, when you're looking at your data in SPSS, or maybe even if you get it back in Tableau, it's going to look very wide, right? If we had, in the case of this maybe 10-minute survey, we have tons and tons and tons of columns, making it nice and wide. So first thing you're gonna do, if you're in this case, is obviously most of you guys know this just from working with data in Tableau, is encode your data so you can easily understand it and know exactly what you're working. The second step, which I think is the meat of this presentation, is creating a help file. And what I found is when I used to early on work with Tableau and survey data, it felt like I was having to manipulate a lot once I got into Tableau. And obviously we know we're going to be creating calculations and parameters and all the things, but you shouldn't feel like you're constantly having to type in question wording and doing all this sorts of stuff that makes it a very tedious process. So the biggest trick whole process is to create a helper file. So your helper file, which I'll have up right here, is going to be 4 different tabs. And your first tab is really just going to be the user ID of every single person within your survey, and then all of the different labels or question responses. So I know I made that a little bit complicated, but in simpler terms, what we're showing here is really just, apologies if they bounce around, is really just this view in SPSS. Or if you had this in Excel, it would be even easier. You could avoid, all going is for every single respondent. And here is in this file, we're showing the actual word. So oftentimes when we have surveys, we'll word it, for instance, maybe we, back and false is 2, is 1. The idea here in this first file is that it's a copy and paste of what you just saw instead of having a code frame here. So essentially it's your raw data here, but you've cleaned it up. The second tab you'll set up is literally the exact thing, but as your codes behind it. Say being true and false here, it's going to say, this is a fake example, but whatever number was with true and false. To get those PSS is just a really easy expert, but again, a lot of you just have this naturally in Excel. That's how you did the survey. So if you did have any sort of complication in terms of coding on the, you might just need this first this sheet. If you don't necessarily have the back end of the survey you've created a code frame, you might have the word neutral. You may not actually have attached a number with it. So in that case, you kind of skip the step completely. So essentially what you've created so far is you've just laid out all of your responses. Now the next thing is what I think is in thinking about the dashboards you're gonna create, and to a lot of Erin talked about, is really thinking about what matters to your audience. This next tab I call demos, but what it really is these are all the variables that you might want to consider for filter variables. So I called it demos or demographics because typically demographics are a good candidate for variables we might want to filter by or kind of slice and dice the data by. And so here, same thing, taking the user ID, any good survey is going to have a user ID for each participant. But what I've done is I've literally just copied any variables that I think from this sheet that I think I might want to be able to cut the data by. So you can see I've got religion here. And this is one area where I tend to be really liberal in that even if you think you might use it, you can put it in here because it's a lot easier to add it on the front end and to have to go back later and either re-import your data or merge some additional data. So you can see I've got age, city, all sorts of variables like this. And the reason we're doing this phase is because eventually what we're going to do is we're going to transpose the data, and we actually don't want to transpose the variable we want to use as filter variables. So it's like we're wanting to transpose all these other data fields except the ones I'm identifying here. So I go through and create, again, I've got my row that identifies user ID. This is how we're going to marry all the data together in the end. And then I've got all the different demographic variables. Now the last tab is what I think is just magic once you get into Tableau with this file and get everything working really nicely. And this is what Steve Wexler taught me is called the helper file. So I know I don't have my questionnaire up here, and don't worry, none of this is confidential. This is kind of a mix of current and non-current clients. Many of any of the currents have been okay with this. So what this page is essentially is I've gone through and I've actually labeled every single one of my questions, and then what I've gone is I've gone through and identified wording. And so this is kind of like what I want to show up, end up in Tableau, say, using a tooltip, a deeper way to identify my questions. And then I actually go through and create a grouping variable, which is just the actual question wording, which really helps us later on when we want to use a tooltip and just be able to hover over, say, a bar and know exactly what question wording is of the metric. And then I like at the end, this is just something I like to add. This is just question type, and this kind of helps me as the user just understand, okay, what type of question am I graphing right now? So if we take a step back here, we've cleaned and coded the data. We've set up this helper file, and I would say this is the step that was new to me and that I think is really great for survey data. You guys might give me a very hard time with this. First started doing this. I don't believe Tableau was around, and so Steve Wexler taught me to use EasyMorph, which is a free tool that you can use to transpose and merge your data. But I know that since then Tableau has its own, so I would certainly opt to use that instead. But the next step is using EasyMorph or Tableau Prep to merge and transpose the data. So what we do, and I won't take you through this whole thing, but there are quite great blogs that take you through it step by step that I'm happy to share, is what we eventually want to do is marry all of this. So we want to marry the values, labels, and demos all on user ID, so that eventually what can happen is we have one long file where all of these additional columns that are nice and long become just one single column that says labels. And then same with here, we have one single column that says values. So all of this is transposed, and the labels and values marry together so that, say, neutral here can also be identified as the number 3. And then what happens when we marry these is demos continues to be this long kind of drawn out column. So this allows us to stay wide, as does the helper file. So I can actually, let me see if I can just pull up the TDE file that comes up just so you can see what it looks like and see how different it is. It might take me a moment here. Hold on just a moment. All right, while it's opening up, I can, okay, perfect. So you can see as it pulls it up here, that what was previously 4 sheets now becomes just one set of data. So we've got the user ID here, we've got those metrics from the helper file, question ID, labels, and wording. And then what we have is, or I apologize, we've got the things from the helper file being question type, wording, and grouping. And then we've got these labels and values that you remove over here. So essentially all of our data is now just these columns. And then these columns all the way over here are just our filter variables, so to speak, versus being all the different variables we originally had over there here. So I'm going to jump around a little bit here into the Tableau dashboard and take a look. Let's hold on just a moment. So a big part of us wanting to do this, and you can see it's a pretty simple dashboard, but what we wanted was clients to be able to choose the target market that was most important to them. And then also, for instance, to be able to look at, say, their own consumers and slice and dice the data, comparing themselves to other brands, but through the markets that are most important to them. I'm going to jump over to one of these charts just so you can see some things on the back end. So once you get the data just so and open up the TDE file in Tableau, it becomes incredibly easy to build charts, because one of the first things you do is just bring the grouping variable over as a filter. So if you remember, the grouping variable was just the actual question wording. It helped me identify, in this case, just the metric that I wanted to show. So I bring the grouping variable over here, and I don't want to get too into the build. I know I'm a little bit all over the place, but if I set it up as a context variable, then once I start adding different filters, it won't be impacted. So I'm sure many of you guys know this, but these gray pills here that are context filters, it just means that any other filters I add on, say gender, age, ethnicity, all of these, the context filters won't be impacted by these variables. So I'm able to really easily build charts because I bring over my grouping variable. I can bring over that wording variable I set up in the helper file and lay that out here. And then really all I have to do once I'm playing around in Tableau is create a few calculations specific to the type of questions I had. So for instance, this question and a lot of questions in this entire survey were asked on a scale. And one thing I really love to do with scale variables, let me get back to a better example here for you guys, is since all of these questions I'm showing right now were scale variables, meaning they were asked on a scale, in this case 1 to 10, in market research, what we love to do is give the, let's say, user the freedom to decide how strict they want to be in what is considered high and low. So for instance, very high might be a rating of, let's say, 10 on a 10-point scale. But we might also say, hey, if they selected an 8, 9, or 10, we consider that high as well. So what we can do here is set up just different choices so they can decide if they want to look at things by anyone that gave it just a 10 or gave it a 8, 9, or 10. And a big way that we set that up in Tableau is creating parameters. So for instance, in the case of this 10-point scale, I created a parameter right over here to identify 1 is those that just selected 10, and then 3 is those that selected 8, 9, or 10. And then I can pretty easily create a calculation that helps me identify what I want to show based on that parameter. And any of these calculations, I'm always happy to share. I use them over and over again. All of these are written for a 10-point scale, but you can use one for a 5-point scale as well. And so that way, once your reader is inside the dashboard, they've got a lot of freedom of what they want to look at. So for instance, this reader might say, okay, I want to be more strict and just look at those that gave it a 10 on a 10-point scale. We can also start to give them more freedom in terms of how they want to look at their consumers. And so much of data is already set up in this way where you're not having to type out questions and do all this additional stuff I remember doing. Just setting up the helper file really sets you up in a way that all the content you actually need is really already in your data set, and the main thing you're actually doing is really just creating calculations based on how you want to look at specific data points. Let's see if I have anything else. I think that is about it. I know I kind of cruised around. It's kind of a mix of getting in the weeds of things and high level. So I'm going to step back for a moment because I haven't been seeing anything pop up on the chat. If there are any questions, just let me know.
So I have a question. I'll just ask you live, real time, Shaelyn.
Yeah.
So I've done a bit of survey work in Tableau as well, and I think you've hit on what has been my own experience, where a lot of the data prep is 70, 80% of the work, right? And
Absolutely.
then you actually get it into the tool, and it's fairly easy. But I mean, that's relative, of course. But one thing I've always struggled with, and I'd like to have your opinion on, is has there been a way, and the answer probably depends, I'll caveat it with that, but have you found a way that works best for presenting a large amount of survey questions and answers? And so I'll tell you where I'm going. So I've gone back and forth between putting a lot of worksheets and visualizations on a single dashboard and it being fairly busy, to doing what it looked like you've done, where you've broken it out to 1 or 2 worksheets on a single dashboard, and then sort of guided the user to click through to view multiple dashboards and sort of work their way through it. I've also tried stories. So I was just wondering, from your perspective and from your experience, has there been like an optimal way or a single presentation method that you've found or discovered that has just been awesome, that has worked really well for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question, especially since I know so much of this just focused on the setup versus getting in it all to presentation. And I'll actually open mine as I talk, just so there's a visual for it. But as you said, I would say it depends. So what my typical method is market research is just a little bit different, at least with a lot of our clients, in that so many of them we're teaching to use Tableau. So they're not always really savvy Tableau users just yet. So what we typically do is we'll have still some sort of PowerPoint presentation report that kind of gives them the very simple takeaways of what hopefully they could have discovered in the Tableau, or maybe what we discovered. But my method within Tableau is usually to organize by topic. So say the same way you might set up a presentation by key sections, a key section or a key theme will typically equal a dashboard. And I'll a lot of time thinking about, say similar questions that we might want to look at by similar variables. So in the case of this one, this was a slide where I really wanted to compare customers and non-customers. And it kind of fit a similar key takeaway. And so I would say usually I try to keep it within like 5 to 8 dashboards. And again, this is, just 2 different questions here. I'm trying to think. I think right here we had 3 different questions. And then not really getting too much crazier than that. Although I will say, after hearing Erin's presentation about Footholds, my mind's really going there about how can we help them understand even more by bringing those in. So in simplest response, I would say setting up a handful of dashboards or more that have maybe 2 to 3 graphs on each, the similar theme. And I would say that's for, like, say my client is a marketer. Actually working with someone in a research department, I think some of them actually do want to see each graph independently. And maybe I have, let's say, questions, 40 questions, and so 30 or 40 visuals. Instead of giving them data tables, I would just give them those graphs. But for the general or our general client, this method seems to work. But I'm personally open if other people offer, like if you have something you find work, because again, expertise is in market research. I'm very new to Tableau.
I think this is what you have done here, and what you're showing here is the best way that I have found too. Just because it does a great job of breaking it up into similar topic areas And that sort of helps. It's easier viewing, less cognitive load, like Erin was talking about, than just having everything on a single dashboard and having this massive dashboard to navigate or scroll through. So, yeah.
Definitely.
Thank you.
And one other thing I love, I think this spans beyond survey data, but I use it a ton in survey, is again, if clients are wanting to look at lots of different demographics, I like to have some sort of comparison to the general population. So since in this case, the black lines are the general population, the pink, which this would be a great thing to outline via like a foothold or some sort of instruction that tells the story, but the pink bars are whoever I'm filtering by. So let's see. Kind of play around for a moment. So that way, as the user begins to play with different filters, they have some sort of comparison. And then I'm a fan of not having kind of a bunch of cluttered stuff, so we can move both percentages over to the left. So those are kind of, typically the market research charts tend to be, in my experience, a little kind of fun and fancy, and a lot of times we end up defaulting to bar charts just because that's what our user really knows how to read. But I do hope in time that we can get more creative with that.
Shaelyn, we have a question from the audience.
Sure.
The question is, are there any other visualization examples you can share?
Any other what examples?
Visualization examples.
In terms of like actually showing other dashboards or kind of illustrate other like use cases.
I imagine it's other type of dashboards that you've created for surveys.
Yeah, so I'll speak a little more broadly. We certainly use Tableau outside of this project. I think I presented it in this project because this is just a really big study we do annually. But for instance, we did, and actually it might, I think it's even publicly available. I should have, maybe I could pull it up or share it later. But for the ASU Morrison Institute, understanding COVID and how that's impacting everything. And then we've also done other ones for them. So that's just an example. And the main reason we chose Tableau in that case, instead of like many of our clients just want a PowerPoint report because they're not quite for Tableau, was we wanted people to have the ability to kind of play and explore, because it's like that there are so many different questions, variables that people want to slice the data by. I can kind of bump around to some other sheets in here, like this one, a simple looking report, but we kind of in the back of it, methodology, some of the metrics, give the user a little bit of depth there if they're new to the project. And then we have these nice little barbell charts here, lollipop charts. So a big part of this study was kind of understanding the leap in, say, brand favorability, or the leap in consideration or commitment to diversity once someone becomes aware of a brand's supplier diversity program versus they're unaware. So I find for market research data, again, as much as I hate to say it, bar charts are really powerful. And I really love these kind of barbell or gap charts as well for a lot of different market research data.
Perfect. And the user did specify that that's what he wanted to see, other examples within this worksheet. So thank you.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, sorry about that.
Let's see. Let's give another minute to see if we get other questions. Okay, it looks like we have no other questions. So I think I'm gonna pass it on to Nicole to close the meeting.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you to both of our presenters. Those were both really helpful presentations today, and glad to have you both on. So I'm just gonna wrap up our meeting. Let me go ahead and share my screen again, get organized here. Okay, so wanted to let everyone know that we do have a few upcoming meetings in September. This date is still being finalized, but we're looking at the 24th for an all Arizona user group. And we're still lining up speakers, but it's looking like it's going to be, of course, another really good group. October and November, we're still on course for those. And after that, we're going to, I think, probably play things by ear. It'd be great to be able to get together in person, but of course, no guarantees for our normal holiday happy hour. So we'll let you all know and keep you posted. Don't forget to connect with us using our community page. We're on Twitter, we're on LinkedIn, we have an email. And if you are interested in presenting or know someone who might be interested in presenting, or again, would like to join our leadership team, please do reach out to us. And I think that that is all that we have today. Christian, am I missing anything else?
No, you got it. Thank you. Thank you all for attending.
Yes, thank you all very much, and we'll see you next month.
Bye-bye.